Now.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh my gosh.
We are recording. Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on E-rate documentation retention rules to live by. We hope you all learned something that will be of benefit to you through your lives as an E-rate person for your school, library, or school district. This is the Roxy and Rebecca Show coming to you live from our houses. All right, moving on along. As usual, this session is being recorded and it will be posted on our website along with the slide deck as well. All right, so our training topics for today, we're going to talk about the documentation rule from the FCC. We're going to talk about where to keep your stuff. We're going to talk about paper versus digital documentation, and Rebecca's going to do a demo for us from a free tool that is out there if you want to use it. Okay, first of all, here is the rule from the FCC for all of us that does E-rate. You have to keep all documents related to your application, your receipt, and delivery of services. That includes your hardware, your cabling, your recurring services, so your WAN, your internet, everything you apply for E-rate for at least 10 years. And here's the kicker. After the latter of the last day of the applicable funding year or the service delivery deadline. Okay? So, for example, if you have a 5-year WAN contract or a 5-year internet contract, you have to keep your documentation for 10 years past that 5 years. So that's 15 years. If hardware has to be in service for 5 years, then you keep it for 10 years past that 5 years. So in other words, 15 years, or in my opinion, just don't throw it away. Just keep it. I mean, what's it going to hurt? After so many years, after I kept it all in paper copy, I would digitize everything. So if it's, 15 years back, digitize it and get it out of your filing cabinets or out of your boxes. So just don't get rid of it. Better safe than sorry. Okay. Also, any other document that demonstrates compliance with the statutory or regulatory requirements for the schools and libraries, so like your policies, your SEPA documentation, all that sort of stuff, asset and inventory records, POs, anything that remotely pertains to E-rate, canceled checks for your invoices and things like that, you have to keep those for 10 years after that date of purchase or past that that 5-year contract period, so forth and so on. All right, moving to the next slide. Okay, let's see if it'll move now. Okay, production of records. Schools, libraries, consortia, and service providers shall produce such records at the request of any representative, including any auditor appointed by a state education department, the administrator, the FCC, or any local, state, or federal agency with jurisdiction over the entity. So if they ask you for them, you have to produce them. And I knew I wasn't here isn't a good excuse. Okay? So in a place where there's a lot of turnover, there better be a way to keep up with the documentation. And there better be some way to pass it on to the next person should there be someone who leaves or, like as I said, a high rate of turnover. Audits. Schools, libraries, consortia, and service providers shall be subject to audits and other investigations to evaluate their compliance with the statutory and regulatory requirements for the schools and libraries universal service support mechanism, including those requirements pertaining to what services and products are purchased, what services and products are delivered, and how services and products are being used. Schools, libraries, and consortia receiving discounted services must provide consent before a service provider releases confidential information to the auditor, reviewer, or other representative. So these audits ask for the paperwork, and 99.9% of the time, the only way you're going to get through an audit is to have the paperwork to back up that you indeed did follow their rules. Inspections. Schools, libraries, consortia, and service providers shall permit any representative, including any auditor appointed by such and such and such and such, to enter your premises to conduct E-rate compliance inspections. Okay? They do come on site. I've been on site with them. Sometimes if you're in a big audit, such as a BCAP audit, they can spend several days on site. It just depends on what type of audit or inspection that they're doing. And you have to let them in and let them do whatever they seek to do.
Even with ladders.
That's right. They will go to the ceiling. All right. Documents for a minimum of 10 years beyond the last date to receive service. And as we talked about this just a few minutes ago, since the last day is well after the start of the procurement application cycles, you can actually have to keep some of this stuff 12 years or more. So as we say, don't get rid of anything. Keep it organized, and keep it in a safe place, and make sure others know where it's at and how to retrieve it. Okay, Rebecca?
All right, and I love the title of this next slide. Furthermore, these retention records are very detailed, and failure to produce these records will, and many times do, result in E-rate funds being recovered by USAC. That means a COMAD, which is when they take money back that's already been dispersed. So here are some of the documentation for your discount rate calculations, for your SEPA compliance, your request for proposals, all of your records of who won and who lost your bids, all of your quotes, as well as all of your inventories. And this includes the packing list that comes in with equipment, receipts. Let's say you had to replace a piece of equipment. So you will have to have records for where you sent that equipment back from being replaced, and keep the receipts for equipment that replaced it. Everything pertaining to E-rate, and including emails, your inventory, everything, your mini bids. If it applies to E-rate, you need to keep it. Okay, we're going to talk about where to keep these records. Most forms are in EPC, the EPIC system, from 2016 forward, but I would keep them in a different place as well. Don't depend on EPC copies, and we were told by USAC and USAC training not to depend on their EPC system for keeping our forms, because anything could happen with that system. And if you've ever been in there and messed around, you know what we mean. Okay. So with that being said, definitely you need to keep them outside of EPIC yourself. Electronic records really need to be kept, and kept accessible and kept in a filing system so that you can figure out where they are and how to access them. And that includes your financial records and all of your technology records that pertain to E-rate. The technology director or CTOs, managers also need to make sure that finance folks know where these records are and have access to them as well. Okay, now we're going to talk about, do we want paper or digital? Roxy and I are of the same mind on this. I like to have those. I kept records for a library system, and when I assumed that position in 2007, there was not one piece of paper in my library, not one. I had to go back to county records, and the county that was over my library was in an 8-story high-rise building. So it wasn't that easy to get the copies of all of the things that weren't kept at the library. So with that being said, I learned the hard way what I needed, because I got a notice of an audit 2 weeks after I started that job. And that audit went on for 3 years. And trying to produce copies of things that far after the fact was not easy. And at that time, the record retention rule was 5 years rather than 10. So with that being said, I got everything I could possibly get and recreated the wheel at the library with paper and with digitized records, because I ended up, this is before Epic, and so during this audit, I was mailing or UPSing boxes and boxes and boxes of documents to Washington. So we don't want you to be in that situation. So it's wonderful to have digitized records. You'll want to keep some of your records on paper, at least for the first few years, or your, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. But electronic records are recognized as authentic copies by USAC, and a combination of those records meets the record retention requirement. So
I'm going to jump in here if you don't mind, Rebecca.
Okay.
The only concern that we see today with electronic records is access. Especially in charter schools, there's a lot of turnover, and when the next person comes in, there are no E-rate records because somebody kept it in their Google Drive or somebody kept it on their laptop and it's wiped. And all of a sudden, all this stuff is gone for 1 year or 2 years, and that's a problem. So if you're keeping electronic records, you need to not be the only person with access to these records. They need to be in a shared environment, either on a server or in Google with your boss if you're not the boss, or at least one other person having access to all of these documents. I have one place in particular where someone was working on E-rate and they are no longer with the school, and they have all the documentation, plus there's some other issues, and it's being turned over to law enforcement now. So this is some serious issues. So you have to really look at how you are keeping this documentation and who has access to it. Now, not every Tom, Dick, and Harry needs access to it, but somebody other than you does. Those of you who know me know that I used to work in a fairly large district, and I did E-rate there, among other things. So I'm super organized. So I kept mine in a variety of ways. And back when I first started, E-rate was solely a paper world. So I started in the paper world, and I'm also one that likes to go to a file cabinet and pull out a piece of paper so that I can go through it, write on it, think through it, yada, yada, yada. But also E-rate, you have to answer E-rate in a digital format. So I kept things in both formats and kept them backed up, because you never know when something's going to crash and you're going to lose something. So when you keep electronic copies, you need to keep them backed up in multiple places. People other than you need to have access to it at all times. And I highly suggest keeping paper copies as well, just to be on the safe side.
I agree with you, Roxy, having gone through what I went through, the trial by fire, as I call it. And those who've heard me talk before, I usually tell this story in every boot camp, but I'm going to tell it again because it really, everyone needs to be aware of it. I started here in 2016, went to a charter school to visit, and the charter school was in a panic because they had hired a consultant who did all of their E-rate, and that consultant kept all of their E-rate files. We were up upon a hard deadline to invoice USAC, and when it was almost time for that deadline, the charter school kept trying to contact their consultant whose phone was disconnected. And after some searching people who knew people, they found out their consultant had died, death, and the consultant's husband had the phone cut off and he moved. And there goes all that school's records. They never found out where he moved to or what became of their records. Long story short, they didn't get any of their money that year because they couldn't produce any records. And this is a true story, and I wish it wasn't true, but even if you have a consultant, you are still responsible for keeping the records.
Exactly. And lots of consultants, they do your work for you. They file your forms and yada, yada, yada. But they are required to give you copies of everything they do. And most will do that every year or every quarter or whatever, and they'll send you copies of everything. And you have every right to it. It's your work. So you need to make sure that you have everything because it's your name. You're the one being audited, not them. And if you look at your contracts, if you have consultants, there are liability clauses in there. It's not them that's going to have to pay back the money. It's you. So make sure if you're using consultants or if you have used them in the past and you do not have your paperwork, you need to get it because, you can be audited today for something that happened 5 years ago.
That's right. And also, we filed an appeal for the charter school to get the invoicing deadline extended due to the death, and they denied it. So death isn't an excuse. You need to get it done. Get it done.
Get her done.
Get her done. Moving on to the next one, we're talk about the evergreen binder, and that is it's a physical storage, as Roxy and I both really want you to have a physical way to store things that do not change, and they're frequently accessed. So these documents would be, here are some examples on the slide, the proof of your eligibility, your IRS not-for-profit determination letter if you are a nonprofit or charter school, what your BIN numbers are, and all of your SEPA compliance documents, such as the board minutes where the SEPA policy was reviewed and approved. I would even suggest, what do you think, Roxy, of keeping your SEPA curriculum sign-off sheets in there as well to prove you have done the training.
Yeah, all those SEPA checkoffs that you have to have, the board announcement to the public that the Internet Safety Policy was going to be announced, covered, all those checkoffs for SEPA, they can go in that evergreen notebook.
Right. Okay, so now let's talk about, we know what we have to keep, and we know how we're going to keep it. How do we organize it? So we organize ours, and we highly suggest that you organize it by funding year. And then within that funding year, the different types of documents. And here are some that we suggest: the pre-bid documents, bidding, contracts, your application process, all your payments and invoices. If you do bears, do that. Keep all of your bear materials, disbursement reports, your purchasing, delivery and inventories, all of your forms, compliance documents, and any miscellaneous documents that you have. Now, that's a lot of files. However, there is a way to organize your digital records. Let's move on to the next one. And these are examples within those files. In your pre-bidding, you'll have your LOAs, your letters of agency. You'll have any consultant agreements that you have. We used to be required to have a technology plan. I think it's still a good idea. It's not an ERATE requirement anymore, but it's a great way to keep track of what you plan to do and what you actually did do. Some examples of the bid documents would be your RFP. We used to be published in the newspaper. Don't think we do that anymore with the advent of the internet. But any of your bid evaluation documents where you have the bid matrix, any and all correspondence that you have with vendors, including your state vendors, and then all the bids that got submitted to you, the winners and the losers, and all of your vendor selection documents, which for a mini bid would be your matrix, your project descriptions, all of the information that you use to select your service provider. Okay, moving to the next one. Here, you'll want to have a file for your contracts and any addendums that with that contract, where maybe you added a circuit or anything that that you or the vendor added to that contract after it was signed. Then here are your application examples. You'll want to have your budget, especially for the previous 5 years that we're talking about, 2015 through 2020. You'll want to have all of your entities and their addresses noted, all of your NSLP data, your enrollment, all the copies of your bills for your services, and any item 21 where we call up templates that were uploaded to an application, and all of the PIA review documents. And this year, oh my heavens, there were folks who got literally hundreds of PIA review documents. And I'm not kidding, hundreds. The more FRNs you have, the more you got. And these PIA reviewers, because it was the first year of the state master contract, they wanted everything. So you will need to keep them and be able to get to them. Now, with all that being said, and you're like, oh my gosh, how do I do that? There is free software available. And here is the website, erate.x. They provide free software for schools and libraries to organize and retain the documentation. And in fact, the owner and programmer emailed me this morning, and she is a friend of mine. She mainly is, she's a consultant, but she consults mainly the libraries in Colorado and California. And she is I guess they're doing some software updates, and so I'm going to get with her later today and look at what updates and innovations that they've come up with. But I love this system because it's so easy to manipulate. Like I said, it's completely free, and I like the way it's all organized. And the way we keep ours, we don't use this software per se at the state, but we use a system that's almost identical as far as how we organize the files. So this is a great way if those aren't your skill sets, the organization part, this is a really good way you can organize it and use it and have access to it. Okay. Wrapping everything up in a beautiful package. Don't throw anything away. Organize your system and make it shareable yet secure. I mean, we don't want anything to happen to those files. So we need to have a way that they can be shareable and that they can be backed up. We're going to have some Q&A, and Roxy's listed some resources here. And these are your resources, as always, our website, which has training, education, templates. This training will be posted after the fact. And also we have an E-Rate handbook, and it's got so many great suggestions in it, even if we did write it.
I also have a couple of, I know of one in particular for documentation and things. It's just a list to make sure you're keeping and how to organize your documentation. We will put with this as a resource as well. Rebecca, do you want to go into the, oh, you can't share, can you?
Well, I probably could, but I believe Bev has taken it down this morning.
Oh, darn.
Yeah,
okay.
She just emailed me about 15 minutes before we started.
Oh.
So I'm not going to be able to do a live demonstration.
Oh, okay.
But if anybody does want that, let's say next week after I meet with Bev, then just shoot me an email and I'll plan a live demo for you and show you exactly how the software works and how simple it is. And then you go to the erate.docx.com. There's a link there to email them and get them to meet with you and get you set up if you do want to use the filing system. And I like it because it's secure, it's backed up, and like I said, it's really simple to pop your files in there.
And you have to get a hold of organization and retention of your documentation from day one. You can't just let your emails go into a folder and filter off to the side or throw them in a folder without organizing them because you won't be able to find anything. And I see this a lot, you know, when I'm working with somebody and I'll say, okay, what is your quote? Pull your quote for, you know, your switches. And I'm like, hang on, I know I got that. Let me see if I can pull it up in my email. You should have already pulled that quote, put it in a folder for category 2, funding year, whatever year, switch quote, and by the name of the vendor. I mean, that's how organized you need to be with this stuff. It shouldn't be buried 6 months back in your email. When you start working with this stuff and getting these emails, you need to start pulling that stuff out, putting it filed in folders, either, you know, on your computer, in Google, on a server, wherever. Like I said, I wouldn't keep it just on my computer. I would put it somewhere where others can access it. I mean, face it. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. You could call in rich. You could hit the lottery tonight. You could be hit by a Mack truck. Somebody else needs to get into that stuff. So it doesn't need to just be tied to your name. That's why I highly suggest paper copies stored somewhere that others know where they are, like your boss, your admin, someone who shares your office, whatever, as well as digital copies easily accessible by someone else, a shared Google folder, if nothing else.
And we have the, I don't know if you're going to call it the, we're blessed to have gone through so many audits, but having gone through quite a number of audits, we are talking about something we know very well. And this is the thing that hangs up people with E-rate. This is the very thing that will make you or it will break you, is being organized and being able to put your hands on these documents.
Exactly. And neither Rebecca nor I mind at all helping you organize your stuff. I would rather, if COVID ever goes away, walk into a big room with you and have it all on a table and help you put it in folders or notebooks, whichever you like, because I like organizing. I've done that with somebody before. Then have you lose $50,000 because you couldn't find a quote for quotes and for switches and access points. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I did this not long ago. I set someone up and made them binder tabs and said, here are your binder tabs, you know, for someone who was just starting out and who didn't want to use the software. I made a binder and had all the tabs there.
Yeah.
So here's how to organize it. So we'll help you.
Anytime you're dealing with federal money, audits are going to happen, whether they be big or little. And paperwork is always a huge piece. Documentation, keeping your documentation, huge piece of those audits. That's what's tied to your money. So, yep.
And you can also call on your finance folks because they go through an annual audit, at least one, probably more than one. They probably have Title I audits, and any kind of federal money comes with strings attached, and they're almost always auditable strings attached. So people in finance or people who become accountants are, generally speaking, very organized people and who value organization. So call on your finance people to help you get it put together.
Right. Yep. So keep it by year, funding year, and then keep it within categories inside of each funding year. That's the best way to do it.
True.
All right, any questions? If you'll put your questions in the chat, if you have any questions. Okay, does DPI recognize the E-rate docs as a preferred way to keep up with E-rate docs? No, it is not recognized as a preferred way. It is just something that's out there that we found through someone Rebecca knows. We do not, it's not an advertisement from us. So you keep it however you want to keep it, as long as you keep it. And Rebecca's email is coming in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, other questions? Okay, so if you have any questions that are personal to you, feel free to email either Rebecca or myself. We will be happy to help you individually and get you all organized. Once again, we thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a good afternoon. Please look for the next round of training, which will be on filing the 471. As soon as USAC releases the window dates, we will be scheduling those. Have a good afternoon.